One thing I want to ask you about was this. As usual, everyone always complains about LCS and the quality of the games. It's all terrible. Like, I saw people saying that TSM versus Cloud9 game was terrible. Like, if you actually think that game was terrible, I don't know what expectations you have for the LCS, because I actually thought that was just a very exciting game. That, listen, it had some individual ints. Like, I thought Hoodie and Perks had some pretty egregious ints. But the actual, like, play between the teams, those were comps that aren't, like, easy to use. And they were having to make split-second macro decisions against each other. Like, in some ways, that should be hard. Like, you know, this isn't the two LPL teams. You've got to be realistic. So I personally think the whole idea that, like, the games are terrible, I think they've been fairly terrible for a lot of years. I think some of them are fine. My question is this, though, Crumbs, is I think the dark part about LCS for me at the moment is it's the only time in its history that it doesn't have one really good dominant team. That's the one thing you used to have back in the days. Like, whether it was TSM or whether it was the double Team Liquid squads or Cloud9 with High back in the day, there was always at least one team where you could do the usual shadow box, like the infamous TSM versus Rogue thing. I mean, that was from a different era, but you know what I mean? You could take that team from LA and say, right, listen, I might think the region's bad, but you know, let's throw them in LEC. Would they be the third best? Would they be the second best? If they went to Worlds, could they go top 8? Right? I feel like this is the only year where no one's even starting those convos, because at the moment, it's not just like the league quality from top to bottom. The elite teams in the LCS, they're just sort of taking weeks to just be shit at the moment, Crumbs. It's kind of dark.
That's why I think this actually will be the beginning of the end for a lot of things in the LCS, because a lot of teams invested a lot of money, and they all have the same goals of Worlds, and not all will, of course, make it. And what happens when they don't make it? Rosters will get blown up, orgs will get blown up. And so because you don't have that certainty, it's pretty clear that anybody could make it in the top 3. I think even teams like Dig could come out of nowhere. If the other teams just slightly drop the ball, freaking Dig could come out with like 2 strats that the other enemy teams just haven't prepared for, and suddenly they're at Worlds. So I think that this year will end up just blowing up a lot of rosters. So even if we liked something of what we saw this time around, there's just going to be major changes no matter what, because of how unpredictable it has been. And you can feel it. The orgs are all just pretty much interchangeable in how well they're playing in the top 6. There's really not a big difference in a lot of their games, because they play to the level of their opponents half the time. So when they're up against each other, you can take off the nameplates and you can barely tell who is who if the champion pools were a little bit more flexible. So I think is it a dark time? It's about to be. I think you can see the clouds coming by. The storm hasn't arrived, but it's going to get there once the playoffs are concluded.
Go ahead.
The only thing that I would say, I can definitely see where you're coming from, where you think it's a dark time. The only thing is, I think that we've already been in the dark ages for the past couple of years or so. The only good side that I could see when it comes to there being like more parity at the top of the league is just when you have something like last split, where you have like a team like Cloud9 that just is able to completely stomp everybody, and then even still when they go to MSI, they meet NA's expectations just the same as always. They completely shit the bed. When you look at that as a whole, I do think that the one benefit could be that for a team like 100 Thieves that is looking strong, they at least are hopefully not getting desensitized to NA play. They're not just completely being relaxed, and they actually are having to still compete and hopefully be able to try every single game and actually put in the effort to maintain their spot at the top of the league, as opposed to a team like Cloud9 last season where they were just basically able to solo queue at the entire split. That's the only benefit I could see, though.
I will say, though, I do think EG, if there's any horse at the front of the race, it is EG. And it's because of what you mentioned from Peter Dunn. I like that there was a lot of transparency at the beginning of this roster in saying what they were going to be focusing on, doubling down on the strengths of the players. It looked in half the time, but once they figured it out, those things that they were working on have clearly shown to be their win cons now. Right, so this team is actually playing to the advantages that the players can generate on their own consistently, as multiple players can do it, since they can play around multiple lanes now. And no other team has actually held true to any vision. it doesn't seem to me like any other of the top teams have attempted to go for anything more than a one-dimensional strategy. You have TSM, who has now fallen back to Power of Evil, is Control Mage, and then Huni, maybe if he has a good matchup, they'll put him on the carry, see if he can do some work in the top side. Then you've got Team Liquid, it's all Alfari. If Alfari is not winning lane and taking that advantage to just stomping from top, they're not doing anything else. If 100 Thieves doesn't have a good meta read and just have the right champions that just brute force against the opponent, they're not winning. And then you have, who else? Cloud9. Cloud9 is just Fudge at the moment. If Fudge isn't just hard carrying these games, the rest of the team looks crazy. And so they've kept trying to experiment over and over. And now they've even fallen back on Olaf, which is a fine pick, but the fact that they are only now going back to comfort, and they have come out in interviews and stated that part of the problem was that they were experimenting too much and not knowing what exactly would work for them, tells me it's too late for a lot of these teams. A lot of these teams, it is just way too late for them. And the only one that from start to finish has held on the same idea is EG. And I think that's why they look good. And that is the team that is at the top. But it's just not that far ahead from the others because they started so much lower.
I don't hate the roster construction generally. Like, I do think, sadly, Cloud9 and Team Liquid's rosters on paper has actually looked very good. I mean, obviously, you could never have known if Fudge would be good. So, actually, bearing in mind how good he's been, if anything, Cloud9's roster probably underperforms just like Team Liquid's does, except Team Liquid's never has the real jungler in. So, I will always add that caveat just to give them their fair due. My problem is this. If you want to change the culture and you want to, like, build elite teams, there's people in the region, like Peter Dunn is a good example, who can do it. Like, by the way, it doesn't surprise me that he comes over and immediately they find some miracle rookie who, again, like a bit like Johnson last year, like, where the fuck are these guys coming from? Like,
hang on, I found it. Before you go, that was definitely not Peter Dunn. I know exactly how that was scouted. It was Nizer.
Empire, maybe? Yes.
Empire. It was
I think
Empire.
He said on his show, so, yeah.
Empire
I'm just saying,
scouted him from years ago, apparently.
Yeah, but here's the difference, though. It doesn't surprise me that he would then be put into, as a starter, into a Peter Dunn team, though. If you look at his history of, like, being willing to do that, add in what you need. The other name as well, and this is where fans don't know anything about me or my opinions if they're TSM fans, right? I'm a huge fan of Kays, the guy who is basically the general manager now at TSM. He's someone where, as an analyst for Team Liquid, Fnatic, like, players who have played on this guy rave about this guy. Like, basically, he was like a true analyst, like in sports. Like, he was coming in with like slideshows of like tendencies of what teams are going to do, IG, etc. He would come in, he would break it all down, and he would make it super simple. And if you were a player, you understood going into a game, here's how we could win against them. Here's what they're going to do that they're strong at. Now, you might think everyone does all that. No, everyone else does this thing in League, in LCS, where they think you have to holistically coach every aspect of the game from A to Z, every single session, to prove that you're some good coach. That's terrible coaching. The guy who's the best player in the fucking AD carry position doesn't want you telling him 100 times not to flash and not be like, this is basic level shit. What he wants to know is when I play against this specific team, they tend to do bad backs at one point in the game, so I'll watch out for that. I'll see if I can, like, they need something small they can hook onto. This guy's done an amazing job of that. The problem is, one, GM's a new job, and two, if you know anything about the off-season and the gems I've dropped on a bunch of my talk shows, he didn't get the team he wanted. This wasn't the lineup they were trying to make. They could have had a team that was like Licorice and fucking Jensen and Double Lift, and like they could have had a monster lineup with all vets, all super skilled players. By the way, imagine Sword Art working with a bunch of veterans and people who already are hungry for success and have been close internationally. They would have been fire, so I can't even blame him for that. So I'll say, believe it or not, the future for TSM isn't even terrible if this guy can sort of be given some free reign over who he signs and the right players can go to the team. So there's people there, but I just think the league in general, I think it's stuck in a really bad spot, largely because of franchising. People are still trying to figure out, what do we do with million? Do we invest them? Do we just save and keep with rookies? Can you develop players? Do we keep importing players? Do we get rid of the import rules? At the moment, it feels like everyone's lost and they're just reaching out, lashing out for anything that can change, basically, whether it makes any sense or not.
That's why the end of this year is going to blow shit up. They're going to blow it up. They're going to try something new for sure. I think that's what's going to happen. It's just there's going to be a lot more experimentation. And I think the priority in just staff, right? If Kays has had such a successful track record, then they're going to have to be looking for more people like him and trying to develop him, because you keep Oris keep talking about developing talent. What about the people that grow the talent? No one ever gave a shit about developing that aspect. And then suddenly it's like, oh, we need to make we need to make sharpened steel, but we don't have factories. We never thought about somebody that needed to make factories. And so now we can't actually have the product that we were actually looking for. So I think they'll slowly come back to it. The question is it too late? I think that's the thing. Is it too late? And how long will it take to actually focus and give a dedicated effort on the development of the infrastructure of these organizations to actually yield results that will simultaneously elevate the league and be cost effective while competing internationally and not undergoing some damage to viewership during a reconstruction?
I've got a topic we could maybe flex to now. It'll be an interesting one. So I did an episode of The Crackdown. It was actually yesterday at the time of this recording, but obviously it'll be like a day or two and pass when this VOD comes out, where basically we had Abidage from 100 Thieves on. And one thing he said was that he made a comment that initially sounded shocking, but then he sort of like it, when he explained it, it wasn't quite as he said it. He basically implied the reason he wasn't actually as good in past years is that he just said he was lazy. But what he meant by that wasn't like he doesn't play the game, he doesn't play solo queue. It wasn't that. What he meant was he didn't sort of like actively attempt in practice to like constantly be trying to improve with purpose and like get to the highest possible level he could. He just sort of practiced a bit and practiced with the team, practiced as much as everyone else, but just left it at that. And if he was good, he was good. If he was bad, he's bad. So what he basically implied was now is when he's looking into like, I mean, I'll use words he didn't use, but, you know, now he's sort of like watching what Rookie does in the LPL or Knight. Or, you know, the idea is now he's really going to like the nth degree of trying to find every little edge to get better. And as a result, you can see his games responded in Schalke and now in 100 Thieves. Now, the reason I bring this up, Crumbs, is this is one of those areas where when fans on Reddit talk about how much players get paid or the idea that like, well, they're professional storms, so I'm sure they know better than you how to practice. It's like, I don't think fans to this day know how far League of Legends professional players in the West are from sportsmen. Like the amount of them that don't do things, like if people, they would be shocked, Crumbs, if I told them how many like junglers never watch a pro view of like a Chinese jungler or never bother looking at the matchups in top lane between the two best top laners in Korean solo queue. Like they wouldn't even waste their time doing that, Crumbs. They go and they play solo queue or they watch half a VOD or, you know, they just think a little bit themselves. Like a lot of top pros, they aren't putting in extra, they're not doing Kobe Bryant shit, put it that way.
I think part of it comes from the way that you actually enter, and you can enter in pro play. And I'm speaking from experience in that I became a pro player just from essentially escaping my life by playing a game. I was not wanting to do certain things in school, and then I could just play games instead. And then I'm not dedicating myself to playing this game and improving in every area possible. I'm just playing the game because I want to be doing that and not something else. And this is not a rare story. And then suddenly I just played the game more than anything else that I was doing. And if I have a natural talent towards an inclination towards puzzle solving or just games in general, suddenly I'm really good. And then now I'm getting offers like, oh, I guess I could do this. And then you just keep grinding and grinding and grinding. And you can just grind your way to some sort of success, right? You can grind the unpolished, the rough diamond, and you're not going to get a beautifully crafted structure that's going to make everything, but you're going to get something shiny. And so that can happen for a lot of these players. And then only then, when they get picked up, and then it is required of them, or they're in a position where they value where they're at, and they'd actually like to continue to do this, then do they realize, oh, I actually need to try. I actually need to now think about how to improve. And then that's the problem, that a lot of these players have arrived at the level of professional player while not being a professional. And so they discover how to be a professional during that time. And if it takes too long, they'll be gone and they won't have a shot to get back in.
Thoughts, Oddball?
What was, with Abadage, what did he mention what made him change his mind regarding like his, like,
I can't remember.
demeanor?
It's that money.
I can't remember what it was, mate.
Yeah, I would say that it's just heavily dependent on the culture for the most part. Like, as we mentioned earlier, you have like lots of players coming over to North America that are completely unmotivated, which can obviously be a drag on the other people in the team. So I would say for the most part, it just depends on the culture, the upbringing that you're brought into. And if you obviously have a team with teammates that are heavily motivated as well, that makes it a lot easier. There are obviously some examples of people that are able to just do it on their own and don't need any sort of outside influence. But I think it's way easier for a region if you just have it where everybody has the same motivation and all want to improve progressively.
I actually think it's also a problem of like the age of pro players. They're too young. We have the same problem actually in Counter-Strike, and I'm going to give people even who follow Counter-Strike, this might blow their mind, by the way, this duel I'm about to drop. So a guy who was a former pro who works in the industry part of Counter-Strike is a guy formerly called Lurpis. He's called Tommy now, and he's a Finnish guy who works for basically Immortals Gaming Club, which is MIBR in CSGO, but they were like Immortals basically in League of Legends. Now this guy, he famously said in CSGO years and years ago, when the game had only been out a couple of years, there became a meta within the game where you had very powerful pistol weapons, which are the cheap guns, and basically teams would force buy those guns and have like two people with pistols, like two with like another good gun and like one with like a Desert Eagle or something, and you would just try and essentially, even though you're economically limited compared to your opponent, you just trust that like these guns are pretty strong, so if I have super skilled players, I can sort of break the matrix as it were and just force my way back into the game, even though technically in Counter-Strike, normally what you should do is just save with pistols there and then you have proper money for a gun next round. You sort of, it's essentially the equivalent of, I give up this round, I'll go to the next one, sort of. Right? One of the reasons why he said, even though at the moment that economically in the game actually does make sense, he said, even when it no longer makes sense, pro players will still do the force buy of the worst weapons because they want to have fun and not have boring rounds in the game. Now, you might think as a fan, there's no way thought, like, they're professionals, like, they're there to win. No, it's true. Literally, even in times, because funnily enough, the team that was the best at it, the French team, then had a year where when that wasn't the meta, they just kept doing it anyway. And they lost loads of games by just basically economically crippling themselves. And the reason they did it was exactly that. They didn't want to have boring moments in the game. So even a pro, on some level, needed something fun to be happening to hook him into the game, to keep him interested. Now, the reason I bring that up is because I always say this, right? The best example I always give this for is when a fan talks about a pro player's working hours, right? You know, when they go, that's nothing. I play the game 6 hours. Now you play the game, motherfucker. He supposedly practices the game. And if you don't know the distinction between the two, you'll never know what it's like to be pro. Because the problem I have is this. I think the same scenario happens with an LCS pro and an LCK pro. He hears, oh, they practice 12 hours a day. Listen, motherfucker, you might practice 2 hours a day. I've heard some of the stories. Like, when I hear these stories, Crumbs, about, like, as you say about scrims, like, oh, well, we were all demotivated because we had, like, a losing record in scrims. What are you talking about? So you now have to have fun in the practice games as well. You have to win enough practice games to give you personal satisfaction. Otherwise, you don't learn and improve. What on earth is that? Like, in some of these Korean teams, like, people have heard the stories. If you go to Worlds in a boot camp, there's a team every year from the West who has a story that goes like this. Yeah, I lost 15 out of 16 games I played against this one Korean team. Now, in that scenario, right, they'll be like, I didn't learn anything. It's like, you don't know how to learn then, mate. That's the best gift you could ever have been given. Imagine having 15 out of 16 games where enough things go wrong that you lose the game. That's like they're just pointing in massive neon signs at all your problems if you're willing to have the eyes to see.
You must have paid that Korean team to stay with you for 16 games after losing 15.
How polite are they? I know,
like,
exactly.
Like, they know the value they're offering you
True.
and that they're getting jack shit in return. So I think that, yeah, a lot of these teams, you know, I remember in LCK when we played over, I think it only took us 1 day of scrims against one team, and then immediately they demoted us. They did not allow us to scrim against them. They gave us their academy team. It's like, you need to like 3-0 them a bunch before we actually want to play with you again.
Of course.
So yeah, that's a huge value add that a lot of the teams don't have. And I think that the intense practice is also a big difference, because when you have your KPIs, for lack of a better word, and just what you need to be doing inside the game, then you actually should be gaining satisfaction from that. I don't think that the whole, like, yeah, you can have fun within a game, but as a pro player, your fun is kind of already assumed. That's why you're there. That's why you played in the first place. You were getting satisfaction from the competition, from the winning that you're supposed to be doing, from the improvement that you have, from the camaraderie with your teammates. Like, I think the environment should be one that fosters enjoyment for the people that want to be there. If you don't want to be there, it's not going to be fun, and rolling in a game isn't going to solve that. It's going to be a temporary band-aid.
Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.